Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Calvinism channel. In today's episode we're going to discuss the question of whether election is for service only. It's a very important question because Arminian authors such as Sean Lazar, who is the author of Chosen to Serve, and also Leighton Flowers, who wrote several books against Calvinism, for example, The Potter's Promise. They are of the opinion that election is not for salvation, but exclusively only for service. That is, God places different individuals to do different tasks that He has planned. Of course, we're going to take a closer look at the verse which symbolizes this channel. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit. John chapter 15, verses 16. And so now let's take a look at the Arminian position. Flowers writes on page 139 of The Potter's Freedom. He says that there is no distinction between those vessels blessed with effectual salvation and those vessels cursed with reprobation. Rather, there is a distinction between those vessels blessed to carry out the noble purpose of God's promise and those vessels hardened in rebellion in order to ensure the fulfillment of the same promise. Now, such a position is odd. It begs a question why service and salvation have to be completely divorced from one another. Those whom God saves also sets into service. If you're a Christian, you will not sit idly by. The Lord will call you into service to preach, teach, go door to door, stack chairs, or help with sound, etc. 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 16 says, For now I have chosen and sanctified this house, that my name be there forever, and my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. In this verse, God not only chose the house of Solomon, but also sanctified it, so that His name, His eyes, and His heart, or that is, God's eternal presence, may be there forever. Sanctification, as we have seen, is a stage in the order of salvation. One is only sanctified if one has already been chosen, called, and justified. The prophets and the apostles were all men of God. They obviously believed in the message of salvation that they were tasked with preaching to others. It is only a saved man who can truly preach the gospel of salvation to others. A man must first experience the gospel to be able to explain it to others. It can be no other way. How can an unbeliever preach Jesus whom he doesn't know? Why would a rebellious sinner be obedient to God? When Jesus addressed the disciples at the end of Matthew's Gospel, that is a very famous portion of the New Testament called the Great Commission, He teaches them to make disciples of all nations, teaching them to keep all things that He had commanded them. Only a disciple can make another man a disciple. Jesus also tells the disciples before they are to go forth that He is with them even to the end of the age. Jesus is with His disciples only. Jesus is with these disciples not only to the very end of their lives, but to the end of the age. This signifies that these disciples had been regenerated and are carrying out Jesus' will. Furthermore, let us examine John chapter 21, verse 15 to 17, which says, So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Feed my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. So previously, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times when they had asked him if he was Jesus' disciple. Peter had done this in unbelief. Unbelievers are those who deny Jesus and thus inherit damnation. Yet even after Peter had regretfully wavered in his faith and he denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus lovingly restores him by 3 times tasking him to feed and tend to his sheep. If Jesus had rejected Peter for denying Him 3 times, how would Peter have had any willpower at all to preach the gospel the way he did at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2 verses 14 to 38. This clearly would have been impossible. A verse that has been analyzed previously is also very pertinent here. It's John chapter 15 verse 16. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. Here, Jesus clearly has chosen his disciples to go and bear fruit. However, Sean Lazar counters the salvific implications of John 15:16 by referencing John chapter 6 verse 70, where Jesus says, Jesus answered them, Did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? Here Jesus had chosen the 12, but one of them, namely Judas, is clearly not regenerate. Thus, Arminians may argue that John 15:16 does not refer to election to salvation after all. But this argument does not consider the consistently Calvinist position of double predestination, or gemini predestinatio, or twin predestination. John 17 verse 12 says this, While I was with them in the world, I kept them in your name. Those whom you gave me I have kept, and none of them is lost except the son of perdition, that the scripture might be fulfilled. Judas was born unto perdition. In other words, this was Judas's fate. Of course, he was God's chosen vessel to betray Jesus, and indeed he fulfilled this task as well. Whether one is chosen to salvation or reprobation, one is also given a task to carry out. As we have seen, God chose Pharaoh in the book of Exodus to oppose him so that God could display his power and might in saving his people, Israel. Reprobation will be spoken of in another video. As for now, we can check these verses which support the Calvinistic biblical doctrine of reprobation. In Job chapter 21 verse 30, Proverbs 16 verse 4, John 3:18, John 8:47, Romans 9:21, and Jude chapter 1 verse 4. But let us examine John 15:16 in some more depth. Jesus chose his disciples so that they should bear fruit, but furthermore that their fruit would remain. This is not some temporary fruit coming forth from some temporary faith, as in such people who receive the word with joy, but then stumble immediately when persecution arises, as Jesus says in the parable of the sower in Matthew chapter 13 verse 20 to 21. Jesus tells us that we can recognize believers by their fruit. Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. This is Matthew chapter 7 verse 17 to 18. Therefore, Jesus has chosen believers to bear fruit, good fruit, because he has chosen them for himself for salvation. Lastly, John 15 verse 16 also implies that those whom Jesus has chosen may ask whatever they wish from the Father in his name, and they shall receive it. Although all men are God's children in a general sense, this verse implies that those whom Jesus chose have been adopted into God's family, and thus have special access to God as their Father through Jesus. God is angry with the wicked every day, Psalm 7 verse 11, and though God does make the sun rise on the evil and on the good, Matthew 5 verse 45, as a part of the common good, yet God listens to his children only, and only to them does he grant their requests and desires. Thank you very much for listening, and God bless.